Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello, I'm Paul Obertelli and you're listening to edition 82 of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK, bringing you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our sticky mitts on. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion, and much more. For anyone who would like to contact us and give us some feedback or maybe recommend a guest for the show, you can email us at info@thatalks.com. Again, that's info@thatalks.com. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can find us on iTunes and Stitcher and many other podcast directories out there. Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back here on THA Talks, and thank you for tuning in again for another interesting show we've got this evening. I'll tell you what, I want to talk about a little bit about the left and a little bit about the right, political spectrums, because there seems to be a lot about this nowadays. It's very, a lot of debates going on the left and right. Every political debate seems to have these two perspectives. And I mean, recently I've been thinking, you've got the right and you've got the left. And is that all there is? I mean, it's kind of, I'm on the right, I'm on the left. It's a little bit like people supporting football teams. You know, I'm a lefty, well, I'm a right man. And it doesn't matter how badly your team's doing, or if it's got a corrupt owner, or the manager's no good, or this is going on in your dressing room, you'll stick by that team. You know, and I think from my perspective, this seems to be what's going on a lot at the moment. You know, I personally do not regard a left and right political spectrum anymore. I think it's so corrupt, so twisted. And I think there's so many different levels of government throughout the world, throughout the banking, throughout governments. I don't think there is a left and a right anymore. I just think there's, I mean, it sounds pessimistic, but I'd say there's corruption. And I've always regarded myself as a bit of a lefty, a bit of a left-winger as I've grown up. You know, I've been a musician. And, you know, you quite like that hippie left wing. That's cool. I feel good about myself being like that. And to a degree, I'm still like that. I've still got left wing, or in commas, left wing tendencies. But at the same time, I don't see the spectrum the same anymore. I've lost faith in that whole ideology of the left wing, because anything to the extreme that you see, and without any balance, eventually you get faults that come through it. You look at things and you become disillusioned by it. But what really gets me at the moment, and the reason why I can't regard myself as a left winger anymore, is because since I've seen some of those flaws and I've tried to speak out, you try to say something against it, you suddenly realise that there's not a lot you can say. You feel very restricted. This in the culture we're living in now, be it whether we're talking about sexism or racism, prejudice here, prejudice there. It's very restrictive in what you can say. In the mainstream media, actors, musicians, if they're very much in the limelight and popular, they get gagged. You know, you know the ones that are on the good contracts. You know the ones saying what they should, taking the right pictures, going on the right magazines and promoting things they should be promoting. And you know the ones that aren't, that suddenly fizzle out and disappear or get a really hard time. And I'm kind of saying this because we've got a very political show ahead of us this evening. And recently I've been regarded, he's a right winger and that. I couldn't care less, to be honest, if people want to say I'm a right winger. If you want to think I'm a right winger, good to you. It doesn't bother me, because I really don't recognise those two spectrums anymore. What I will say is what I thought was the left wing and what I've regarded myself as, I'm really questioning now. I'm really questioning that. That doesn't mean that I'm suddenly becoming a right winger. It means I'm questioning that, and I've already been at a time where I've questioned the right wing. So I'm questioning everything now, because I'm not convinced by either, and I think it's just about time for some common sense and people thinking for themselves. Stop looking at movies and television programs to tell you what to think and to how we should be, and this is our role model, that's our role model. Look to your next door neighbours, look to your friends, look to among us. We're the people living in the real world, not the television. But anyway, with that, I'll get off my soapbox a little bit now. I just needed to air that a little bit because I've been thinking about this show all day. Shana will not be with us today. She's having a day off, and she's still a little bit recovering from her illness, but she's doing very well, and she's really involved, and we've got some really interesting ideas in the pipeline. So that's all good. But today, we've got someone who you may recognise that's going to come on the show today. So I think it's time now for us to go over to the other side of London for a surge and a dramaturge and a man called David Parry.
Oh, I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free from your lies. You're so self-satisfied, I don't need you. I've got to break free. God knows I want to break free. Good evening, Mr. Obertony. Like old times, we're back together again.
We are indeed, and you sound really free.
Do I?
Yeah, you sound liberated.
Liberated and indeed libertarian, I say.
I think it's because you're back on this show and it's just, you just feel like you're at home again.
Well, I am at home again and I have sort of missed it. But, you know, as I said to you and our listeners previously, there are only bloody 24 hours in the day. Yeah. And I don't want an early heart attack. It's really as simple as that.
Exactly. Well, I'm sure this isn't the only time you'll be back. I'm in good company with you and Shana, so that's cool.
Yeah, all going swimmingly. Congratulations on the transition. Yeah. Things are picking up.
Cool. So we got a very interesting guest coming up this evening, haven't we?
Well, I mean, before I go any further, I need to declare a certain sort of vested interest here. Not only am I a lifelong libertarian, as a personal commitment, I'm also I mean, God, where do I go with that? You know, influenced by people like Rawls and Nozick, if that makes any sense to anybody. And also sort of, I'm the acting press secretary for the Libertarian Party UK, which will not influence the way I interview this evening, but I do think I need to sort of say that, you know, up front. I mean, you and I are excited, Paul, because of course these ideas are causing a ruckus at the moment.
Oh yeah.
And you can talk about that in a minute, maybe. Yeah, I mean, Andrew Withers is a colleague of mine. He's the official party leader of the Libertarian Party UK. He's an experienced broadcaster and speaker. And it's my personal understanding that he wants to come on the show and talk about his beliefs, his views, and why we all need to be free.
Well, yeah, and I've been looking forward to it as well because I'm getting more into politics. It's probably my age, but I'm getting more into politics because it's just I just think you realise in life, even if you're not interested in politics, politics is interested in you. You know.
Well, I mean, a sad fact of our times, isn't it? You know. I suspect someone living in the 1930s would hardly have noticed the presence of the state as they went from birth to glory, the other side of it. But now it's in your face everywhere you look. And something is deeply wrong, at least in my view. It's too intrusive. I mean, why do we need all these cameras everywhere and genetic databases and constant surveillance and rules for this and rules for that and rules for the other? It's inhuman. We can't all live that way. There's something deeply wrong at the moment. What do you think?
Well, I'm going for a very reactionary situation at the moment because I'm feeling not just with friends and stuff, just within society, you suddenly feel like there's very little you can say. I was saying to our listeners earlier, but it's and I'm feeling that, and I think a lot of people are starting to feel a little bit of a reaction to that and go, well, hang on, you know, this is feeling quite restrictive now. You know, getting a bit difficult to breathe now, and which isn't good. I don't feel that society is becoming more free. I feel that it's becoming more restricted. I really do. And I mean, I'm kind of pessimistic because I'm not convinced there's any politicians out there that's going to save us, but I am interested in libertarianism, what I've read about it. It's an interesting philosophy. It's kind of refreshing, I guess. That's what I can say about it. So shall we get to it?
Let's get to it, my dear. Let's go.
Hello, Andrew. Welcome to THA Talks. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for inviting me, Paul.
Well, first of all, I mean, we've just had a UK election pass by. How do you think it went? What are your views on it?
Well, unfortunately, from our point of view, we've now ended up with a government that is claiming that it's actually got a majority, which from my calculations and that of the Electoral Reform Society has got about 28% of the recorded vote. Hardly a representative democracy in our opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had UKIP with about 4 million votes. You had, I think, the Green Party with about just over 1 million, and I think both of them had about 1 seat each. So, regardless of whatever anyone thinks about the party, it just doesn't seem like the people are kind of being heard at the moment, you know.
Well, I think it's a little bit more than that. I mean, I'm now in my late 50s, and the first political organisation I ever joined at the age of 17 was the Campaign for Electoral Reform. Even as an immature politics student, it seemed to me that there was something very badly amiss with our system, and it's probably taken 40 odd years now to actually get to the point where it's actually been driven home. Now we've got a multi-party system, just how unfair it is.
Yeah, and what is your views on the Conservative Party and their plans for the country?
Their plans for their country, unfortunately, they're placed in the same position that they were after every Labour administration, is that they then have to go in and sort out the mess. But I'm still very dubious, especially we've just had the budget as we're recording. We've still got a massive debt that the Taxpayers Alliance is putting at something like 8.6 trillion, whereas it's about 1.2 trillion. I think they're paying ducks and drakes with the figures, and especially when we've got a crisis going on in Greece with public debt, it's very, very concerning and all very worrying. Literally, the Conservative Party seems to be, now it's actually got into power, as I said, with 28% of the available vote, seems to be pushing through some fairly draconian and hardline authoritarian measures, which is probably where ourselves as Libertarians and Conservatives actually part company.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fuss going on with the austerity. I mean, not just in this country, but around the world. Where do you sit with that?
Well, with austerity, I mean, today we're having savings on various benefit cuts, this, that, and the other, and yet we still seem to be exporting a lot of money to the EU on a monthly basis. Foreign aid seems to be going crazy. Yeah, I work extensively abroad, and I don't see that aid actually ending up in the pockets of local populations in some of the countries I work in. These are some departments that actually either need scrapping or significantly reducing. Literally, our spending is still going. He's actually saying that he's actually trying to bring the whole thing by 2020 back into surplus. That is just the actual trading of government, which has been rising extensively under the last administration, which was a coalition, as we all know. It's just the rate of growth of state spending has gone down, not the actual spending. We've still got far too many people working for the public sector, and literally, it's as ever. It's always the poorer and the have-nots who end up by paying for this. The haves can afford accountants to wend their way the system, or if push comes to the shove, they can dust up their business and go to a lower tax threshold state, which is some of them have done, Amazon in particular.
Okay, well, I would like to get more into the philosophy behind libertarianism and also to obviously find out more about your party and so on. But there has been some interesting gossip around recently regarding the Canadian candidate Lauren Southern and her suspension following the protest at the feminist anti-rape rally. She was very outspoken there and quite bold in what she thought in her opinions there, which people are free to do. But a lot of people were a little bit upset that the Libertarian Party kind of gave way to that. It seems like the feminists, as soon as they cry and complain about something, then someone's got to be punished or heads roll. And they're a little bit disappointed that the Libertarian Party played a part in that this time. What are your views on that?
Well, I have not got the views on this. I've actually spoken to Tim Moen. this morning, who's the leader of the Canadian Libertarian Party.
Right.
Basically, the situation was that Lauren actually is supposed to be part of a political party, and whether it's a Libertarian Party or a Socialist Party or a Conservative Party, there has to be a modicum of party discipline. There were more issues going on than just that particular issue. There's been a lot of, as ever, in the internet with people sounding off, really don't know what they're actually talking about, but they just got an axe to grind. Tim tells me this morning that he flew to Vancouver yesterday. He's met with Lauren Southern, very amicable meeting. She has been reinstated. She's accepted that she needs to be a team player within the Canadian Party if they're going to make any progress, and she's taken to that effect. And likewise, Tim, on behalf of the Canadian Libertarian Party, has actually said he respects, and so do the party respects, her right to free speech. So as of yesterday afternoon, she has been reinstated. And as far as the Canadian Party is now concerned, it was a bit of a storm in a teacup.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a supporter of women's rights, and at times I've regarded myself as a feminist supporter to a certain degree. But this new third wave, intense feminism, you know, everything we say is true, or you're a misogynist. You know, it's I can't get behind it. I really can't. And I think Lauren showed she's got more balls than a lot of guys. To be honest, I'd shake her hand.
Well, exactly. I mean, I saw the photograph and I saw a bit of YouTube footage. Very, very similar, and I do apologise to Vera that I can't pronounce her second name, who is one of the leading lights of the Russian Libertarian Party. For me, I've had asked from, well, people who allege they're libertarian but seem to be anything but Vera, who's now had to leave Russia. She's been locked up too many times for her own comfort under the Putin government, and she's now living in the Ukraine. And literally, if you see some of the things put up with, being she's barely 5 foot and having a 6'2" Russian security guard ripping up all of the leaflets that she was quite legitimately giving out. That's a young lady who's a journalist with a lot of courage. So basically, anything that myself or Tim Moen have been through is just pales into insignificance. They're the real libertarians. They're the real feminists who are actually standing up and actually taking an authoritarian state on. And, you know, we admire, and, yeah, irrespective of sex, it takes courage to do that and to stand up and be counted.
Yeah. Yeah, well, moving on a little bit, I'd like to address the left and right thing. I mean, a lot of people regard libertarianism as kind of some, like a bit like anarchy, this anarchistic kind of way about it. But then there's some that say, well, it's just a right-wing thing. You know, that's what it is. For some of our listeners that don't know, and so I mean, what is it? You know,
I'll tell you what the Libertarian Party of the United Kingdom is.
Right.
The Libertarian Party of the United Kingdom is a minarchist party. It means that it is. We follow the writings of Nozick, who sadly died at a very young age in the early 80s, in as much as that we have to accept that there has to be a state. State has to be a very small one. It primarily, the only legitimate role of any state is for the defense of the people that actually form that. So literally, this is the top priority to, I mean, otherwise there's no point having a state if you're being invaded. From there on in, it is up to the democratic will of the people state as to what they wish to spend their money on. So we accept there has to be a state. We're not anarchists by any shape or form. In fact, I was actually finished an article this afternoon, which has been passed on to the publishers, is that a Marxist is actually looking to actually get to a communist utopia through the medium of the state. The state is the best way to actually get to where we're all going to be sitting there, all held in common. We all love each other and we all shake each other's hands and kiss each other every morning. Unfortunately, a Marxist using the state that way has to probably kill off 5 to 6 million fellow citizens, as happened in Stalin's Russia and in Hitler's Germany, of people who actually disagree with that stance. An anarchist does not want to get to the communist utopia. An anarchist, via using the state of, I apologise, an anarchist actually wants to get there by destroying all of the instruments of the state, including political parties and any sort of democratic system, really get to the stage of a communist loving. We, as a political party, as a Libertarian Party, we are a minarchist party. We accept there has to be a state, but for God's sake, let's just keep it small, just doing the bare essentials. The rest of us can actually move very for ourselves. We obviously have to help the sick, the young, and the old. That goes without saying, but we do not need a mass state nationalising compassion. So that's where we stand in the political firmament. We're not left, we're not right, and as far as we're concerned, the argument is between liberty and freedom, freedom with personal responsibility against authority, and that's essentially a very brief summary of where we stand in the political firmament.
Okay, so I mean, you've got a police force, a court, and the basic structures that hold the society together. You'll have some sort of left-leaning people now saying, well, what about the disabled, needy people? How can, there's going to be people that need attention, they can't compete. Is it just tough cookies for them, or how?
No, this is where it all goes wrong. Libertarians are always portrayed as we're only out for ourselves, we're only actually interested. Our view is that the most efficient way to actually, it's always seen that libertarians are portrayed, if we're against the NHS, we're against medicine. We're not. What we're against is the most efficient delivery of medical services, and our philosophy is patients before public interest. Unfortunately, the NHS has just had another, I think, 8 billion thrown at it today without any attempt at reform whatsoever. The mid-staffs scandal still has not been investigated properly. Nobody has been held to people dying unnecessarily. It is a public scandal that seems to be brushed under the carpet. We can't carry on just throwing money at institutions like this without fundamental reforms. It's an utter scandal that you have public officers who seem to, well, let's have a reorganisation this year. And this means then, oh, my job has suddenly been made redundant. I will now take 2 years redundancy, which can equate to anything from £500 to £1 million. And then, damn me, they're starting the same job with a different title on the Monday morning. That is what we mean by having patient and interests standing above that of the bureaucracy. And this applies to everything that is in the public sector. There is the Law Commission decided in May 2010, it brought in a Law Commission report that said public servants need to be held to account. I'm just trying to remember the name of the Law Commission report. I should know because we campaigned quite vociferously on it. I think it's 332. But that was squashed, Jack Straw and the public sector unions, because they don't want public sector workers being held to account in the criminal and civil laws for the results of their action. Now, until public servants are held to be responsible, these scandals in mid-staffs will just keep going on and on and on. And we're not against medicine, but what we're after is the most efficient delivery of medicine. That may mean a private solution, but everybody says, oh, look at America, that's a dreadful system. But there are tens of different medical systems that operate across Europe quite efficiently. There are a mix of private and public that work efficiently, but every time you try and discuss the sacred cow of the NHS, you're shot down in flames because nobody wants to discuss it. I always say we must protect the NHS. It's a wonderful institution. And then when you talk to them on an individual basis, every person I've ever spoken to has come out with a horror story of how a relative has been treated, or they were treated. And we've got to start making people who are in the privileged position of working for the state that they are accountable.
Right. Okay. Well, another kind of issue I'd like to touch on is, I mean, I myself and many of my friends who have, we've quite, I mean, I would have regarded myself as being quite left-wing through my life, but the view we've got on society at the moment is we're getting more disillusioned by what's often referred to as cultural Marxism, you know, with a lot of feminism, obsession with racism, and so on. You know, it's very restricting what you can say without offending someone. It's becoming very robotic.
It's all started with a writer in Italy under Mussolini called Antonio Gramsci, who quite correctly said, if you want a revolution, don't do it with guns, just seize the cultural high points in any society. That means the media, the cinema, the newspapers, and you must keep pushing the same line all the time. And it's going crazy. I was at a meeting of the International Association of Libertarian Parties earlier on in the year, and I was introduced to a new concept, which I'm waiting to arrive here in Britain from America. And it's microaggressions. Right, I was stumbling there. I was just having a look through my notes to see what it was, because it's one of the things I really wanted to mention. Right. Is literally aggression now is, for an example, if you have actually got men's and ladies' toilets, and you've got 6 urinals in a gents' toilets and 2 toilets in the ladies', that's microaggression. That's discriminating against females, and people go to town on that. Now, when I compare that sort of level of Gramscian Marxism, that this is the most crucial thing out, compared to what Vera and her colleagues are doing in Russia, standing up, and it just makes you weep that people are prepared to think that is really important and will just go to town. I mean, there are just so many issues going on. The Confederate flag is now up for grabs, and they've hauled that down off Fort Sumter, where the Civil War started in America. And it just seems to be a complete rewriting of history to fit in with a modern perspective. And we actually criticise some of these fundamental Muslims for actually acting in that sort of manner. And sometimes I wonder where we're going as a Western culture.
Yeah, well, I mean, my thoughts were, I mean, taking people's flag away, that's just going to provoke racism. That's going to provoke conflict. And, you know, they've taken our flag away. It's, you know, just let history be history. We've all evolved, move on, and don't worry about it, you know. Yeah,
I mean, that was not an issue until that killing by that lunatic in that Baptist church in the southern state. I mean, he also turned up with a Rhodesian badge on him. Now, at the end of the day, Rhodesia has now not existed now for 30-odd years. The Confederate States of America appeared in 1865. Now, at the end of the day, it was consigned to history. Now, Barth, who was into semantics and French philosophy, basically he said with any symbol there is sign, signifier, and myth. The sign is basically that is a piece of red, white, and blue cloth. The signifier was for some of the people in the southern states. This was their proud history of standing up against the federal government. For the minority black races in the south, it's a symbol of oppression. So that's the signifier. And then on top of that, you get the myth. This is what it stands for us. And basically just tearing up and saying, oh, you're not allowed to think about it, doesn't stop people thinking about it. I mean, just banning something doesn't stop it. I mean, we've had this thing in the 1930s, prohibition about alcohol. It never stopped anybody having a drink. It just created crime. War on drugs because people disapprove and ban drugs. In fact, the drug situation got worse and handed the drugs trade over to the criminals. Really need to think a bit more rationally about where they're actually going and what they want banned and what is not acceptable. It doesn't stop people thinking.
Yeah. Okay, well, David, I can sense David's very eager to get involved in this one.
Well, of course I am. Good evening, Andrew. It's nice to speak to you again. Where do I go with this? I mean, certainly libertarianism's a hot topic at the minute. Red Ice, it's all over Red Ice Radio at the minute. And I suppose my own view is I wish people would focus on the ills of the present rather than worrying about the sicknesses of the past, which we can't do much about. Anyway, I mean, Andrew is a self-confessed Jeffersonian. He admires Thomas Jefferson as much as I do. We're also both Whigs. WHIG for our listeners, the original freedom fighters, you could say, of the British parliamentary system. The origin of
not only that, David, I am talking to you from the village where John Locke was born, who was the founder of the Enlightenment, was born not less than 600 yards away from me.
Oh, well, I mean, how could anyone not be impressed by that? An incredible statement. I mean, Andrew, where do I go with this? I mean, libertarians tend to be, as you mentioned quite rightly, sceptical of received authority. I think that's healthy, but I suppose that might be just me. What do you think the place of free speech is in our modern society, Andrew? I mean, for me, it's the cornerstone of every other civil virtue. You know, if that goes, the others begin to fold quite quickly. But I'm particularly interested in your view as the leader of a political party and a fellow Whig.
Well, free speech is really the cornerstone of liberal with a small L system, which is, as I just said, I live not too far away from where John Locke was born. And John Locke was an extensive philosopher and formulated writings on the law of contract. Without the laws of contract, we probably wouldn't have the prosperous society we've actually got now. Free speech has always been one of those things of what are you allowed to say and what are you not allowed to say. And as I was actually saying before, you can't stop people thinking. So if you say you are not allowed to say anything that is perceived as racist, or you're not allowed to say something that is perceived as anti-feminist or so on, just because you're banning something, it doesn't necessarily stop people thinking it. And all it does is actually drives those thoughts underground, and then that then manifests into people taking, especially in the area of racism, is probably back we're all probably of the same age. We actually remember that racism was actually quite open, and any sort of contentious issue on the TV was actually dealt with programs like Love Thy Neighbour, where it was overt, but now that's just seen as dreadfully offensive, and you couldn't possibly do that now. And I'm just trying to various other programs that would never be able to be made now. And literally, once you actually drive any sort of freedom of expression underground, it certainly doesn't stop people thinking those thoughts, because that's the culture that they actually live in. And it actually starts to repress society. It's toxic to our society, and also in the long run, people will think it anyway and act on the way that they're thinking, not the way they're speaking. And it is very healthy for a society. Unfortunately, we do have areas of people who actually just delight in in being offensive. I mean, there's no other way. That is their reason for being. And literally, nobody's got the right not to be offended. It's a real difficult one, because at the end of the day, as a libertarian, I can't help but say I've got to defend your right to say what you want, and I may disagree with you. I may disagree with you, but I've got to defend your right to say it. But I find that personally very difficult for people who are just out to upset and offend and seem to have some sort of passion to do it, and then turn around when people start kicking back against them, say, well, this is a free country and this is free speech. This has actually got worse under the internet, because I've actually people so offensive on media like Twitter or over the internet, and they behave in such a way that they would never dream behaving if the person was sitting at a table across the room to them. mainly probably because of physical fear of actually having the lights punched out. But at the end of the day, we're in a new age of communication where disembodied voices come across the ether, and you don't know who you're talking to, what their particular problems are. And we are in a whole new field of free speech, and that is going to be tested and seen court cases that are coming up. We've seen now that the European Court of Justice in June passed I think it's the European Court of Justice passed a ruling that websites and social media now are responsible, because you can never find out who these people are using anonymous names and everything else, from actually causing gross offence and using violent language. And they've actually said now it's the website and it's the website owner and the Facebook page owner responsibility to monitor and delete this. So we're in a whole new area, whereas in our era, David, where we wore our full bottom wigs and sat around in coffee shops penning letters, there had to be a respect for the person across the other side of the table or in the room, because he might stick you with his dagger. So at the end of the day, I think we need to actually, if we're going to defend free speech, two-way street. And as libertarians always say, you can have freedom. Everybody needs to have freedom, but you need to have personal responsibility, you're saying. And that is, we're in a whole new area that has literally only sprung up in the last 10 to 15 years. So it'll be interesting, because unfortunately the state will do anything under the guise of something must be done to clamp down.
I think you and I are both worried about ending up in the same jail cell, but I can't imagine more delightful company. There may be no choice, Andrew. There may be no choice. Well, look, I mean, you've raised something there that I think is incredibly interesting. I mean, the whole stream, the whole ethos of libertarian thinking, for me, seems to be running along the lines that life is far too complex to actually legislate for. You must be a brave or an extremely foolish man to start legislating about every aspect of life. Do you think that's traditionally a mark of British libertarianism? Do you think it's still a mark of British libertarianism?
Well, going back to pre-1911, the only person you were ever likely to meet from the state was the postman or the village bobby or the postmistress. And you were perfectly able to hold a pistol for your self-defense in your house, and nobody thought any different. Since 1911, when the first inklings of the welfare state started, is the state and the newspapers have this eternal cry, something must... Why? We've managed to survive as a nation for 300 odd years without actually butchering each other like we did in the English Civil War. At the end of the day, we're a very polite, restrained society, and I would really, really not like to see any more government legislation. In fact, I think, and a lot of the party members actually think, we're actually formulating a policy on this, is that any act of parliament that is actually passed ought to have a sunset clause on it that is life limited. That we advocate that for two very, very good reasons. One, we've got stuff on the statute on there probably 400 years. That just needs clearing out. That's, a nonsense. I think one of the ones they've just got rid of, and it's perfectly legitimate, if you're up in Shropshire and a Welshman is prowling around the walls of Chester after dark, you're perfectly entitled to plug them with an arrow. I mean, that's only just gone off the statute book. But literally, if an act of parliament is worth keeping, it is worth passing it through parliament, again, just for a review. And the second benefit is where I'm concerned, if they're reviewing old legislation on a sort of taking 6 to 7 months doing that, it stops them doing anything else and passing any more legislation that they up off the cuff.
It's always good to be reminded that you're a trained historian. But let's stick to...
That sounds like a trained monkey, David.
Oh no, I promise it wasn't meant that way. I mean, you know the facts of legislation in a way I think few people do. Let's stick to famous people for a moment, however. Adam Smith. I mean, I like The Wealth of Nations. I think it's a beautifully written book. And I notice young up-and-comers, young men in a hurry maybe, they read the first bit of the book, maybe the first 4 chapters. They don't read all the way through, where he's very clear that liberty is not license and he's not advocating a free-for-all. That seems to me very traditional British libertarian. Have you ever read that book, and what would be your view on it, Andrew?
Yes, I have. It's an excellent book, written by a Scot who is a hero of our colleagues in Scotland in the Scottish Libertarian Party. And it is to be commended to anybody who actually wants any understanding of our modern economic system. And I'm going to digress slightly here, because I think that somebody who's actually in charge of our country at the moment I think he's got a Scottish name as well, Cameron. I was absolutely delighted when we were actually first starting up as a party, before he actually got into power, at his last Conservative Party conference, stood up in front of the last one before they actually became part of the government, stood up and he said, "I'm not a libertarian." And I thought, we're making an impact. Yeah. At last, we're making an impact. And then he described what a libertarian is. Not describing a libertarian, he was describing a libertine, which is a completely different animal. And basically, some actually quite rightly said, it is not a license to do anything. A libertarian always has to face facts and take responsibility for his own actions. A libertine hang the consequences. And that is what David Cameron was actually trying to portray the libertarian movement, which is sadly fragmented in this country into so many different individual groups, is all about. It's actually formulating a way of liberty, but we still have to be responsible for our actions. We can't just turn around and say the state will provide. We can't have 8, 9, 10 if we can't possibly support them ourselves or with the assistance of our family. There has to be responsibility, and these are issues that keep coming up. And when I've actually spoken to members of the public out on the hoof, when I've been campaigning, when I was a councillor, is that people still believe essential liberalism of the country, and they haven't really quite grasped how far to the left for both Conservative and the Labour parties in terms of state control our country has swung. They still believe in the essence of law and justice and fair play and being treated well as they would expect to treat others, which for me is the saving grace of being a libertarian in England.
I can sense Paul desperate to get in to the conversation now you said that, but I've got one more question. Hold your horses, hold your horses. I suppose I'm a constitution worshipper. I mean, as to my understanding, we have 6 written documents as opposed to the American one. I worship all of those documents, Magna Carta onwards. The American politician Ron Paul recently said that
Can I interrupt you there?
Please do, Andrew, please do.
We are one of 4 countries that have not got a constitution. One of 4. We have not got a constitution. Our constitution and Magna Carta, I think, has only got 2 or 3 clauses still on the statute books. Everything else has been written out. Our constitution consists of just 3 words, and was formed on the battlefield in June 1645 at Naseby. Parliament is sovereign. That's it. That's it. We have no other constitution. 600 odd people, anything they like. We have a constitutional dictatorship, which gives us, none of us have got individual rights against the state, because those 600 decided tomorrow that it is legitimate that 5'6" balding people who live in Somerset need to go off to the gas chambers is legal. That is what will happen, because it is the law. We have no protection. I cannot then, as a balding, middle-aged person from Somerset, go off to a constitutional court and say, hold on, this is unconstitutional. These people can't do this. So we are one of four who do not have a constitution. The Libertarian Party, if you read our manifesto on our website, is quite clear that the main point of the election was not all the promises of free stuff all the parties were going to give us. We need, as a nation, to have a written constitution, no matter how flawed, that protects every last individual citizen from the state. So you can worship all these dusty documents, David. Unfortunately, they have no bearing on your life.
Horrifically, I stand corrected. And yes, I hadn't thought of them actually being removed over the course of the centuries. That's terrible. Ron Paul, let's get back to that. Describe the founding fathers of America as innately libertarian. I think he's done that on a couple of occasions. Do you think he's right in that? And do you think it's sort of the British spirit? You know, liberality must dominate if we're actually going to be sensible, mature human beings. What's your view on that, Andrew? My view on that he's absolutely correct for a reason. And it's a disastrous day, and I'm going to upset a lot of people here now. A disastrous day in our political history called May 1660, which was the restoration of Charles II, where he gave various undertakings to regain the throne. And he promised just about everything that he could to actually regain the throne. The net result of that is that the Merry Monarch, as he has now been dubbed childish history books, was actually unleashed virtually a reign of terror. And if you actually read the history that period, David, and I'm sure you have as a convinced Whig, and we have dusted down our full-bottom wigs many a time, you will realise literally how many people were being rounded up in the Cato Street conspiracy. It was a very revolutionary period. Now, in the period from 1660 to his death in 1685, literally families that were on the side of Parliament, especially from my part of the world in East Anglia, were leaving in droves. The Washington family of Sulgrave in Northamptonshire packed their bags and they went to Virginia. The Franklin family, for another part of the world, from Wellingborough in Northamptonshire, packed their bags and went to America. Some fled to Holland, some fled Switzerland. The net result was, in the post-English Civil War period, we exported from England all of our radical traditions, and that bore fruit 70 years of the descendants of those people who went to Virginia, set up new farms, new estates, became wealthy, and decided English Civil War will carry on in defence of their liberties. What is quite horrific about the American War of Independence, it was over, I think it was 2 to 4% income tax. We can't get anybody to actually rise up in verbal revolt over 40% taxes in this country. But literally, yes, Ron Paul is quite correct that the people who actually left England from the what was called the good old cause of the Commonwealth went to America, went to other countries, and took their revolutionary thoughts and their thoughts of liberty with them. I always love chatting with historians, but I know Paul is eager to jump in. Paul, my dear.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah, I would like to bring up the very controversial subject, the paedophilia, child abuse claims within the government. Horrible stuff, and very scary. What are your views on that? Where do you sit with that?
Right, quite clear on this, and I've made statements, the party chairman has made statements to this effect. Libertarianism has a principle called the non-aggression principle. You do not initiate force against the weak or against anybody, which is the main reason why we are so opposed to what Tony Blair was doing, and Chilcot cannot be published quick enough as far as we're concerned. It is fairly evident that there has been widespread abuse of children going back decades, going back 40 years. And we're probably only seeing the tip of the debauchery that was actually going back to probably the 1950s, 40s, however far you want to go back. I think it's actually sickening that this is actually... I don't want to see a witch hunt. I don't want to see anybody just accused of being a paedophile. If there are sufficient grounds to be charged, they need to be charged, and they need to have a fair trial. It's as simple as that. We must hold up the principle of law. The Jana case, and I don't really want to be drawn on that because he hasn't appeared before the courts as yet, but the attempt of the state to cover up and saying that he is not mentally fit enough to be charged because of dementia, yet is still fit enough to sit in the House. There is something not quite right. And this is where I think that this Law Commission report, 332, I believe it is, that people who have actually covered up for these criminals need to be brought to account, because they're just part of the wider problem, covering up things that should never ever have happened in any sort of decent society. And it's all down to personal responsibility. The horrific thing in this is that a lot of this is not coming out now of people who've perpetrated these crimes until they're long after they're dead. And it's too late then. It's too late for the victims, and literally it's too late to actually prosecute these people. But libertarianism has the non-aggression principle that you are not allowed, if you actually believe in the tenets of libertarianism, to initiate force against somebody who's weaker, and that you have got no reason to invade somebody's country or sexually assault. You shouldn't be doing that out of common decency anyway. But the only time that the non-aggression principle doesn't apply is in self-defense. So if hordes of soldiers come swarming across our borders, you will find me being the first one who will be taking up arms.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hear what you say with the innocent till proven guilty thing. I think people need to remember that point. But at the same time, I'm quite surprised how passive a lot of people are about it. There's obviously something going on there. We don't know who yet. As you say, you've got to give people fair trials and so on. But it's hideous, really, to think about it. It really is.
It is dreadful, and is symptomatic of what happens when you have a big state and you have a lot of people there wanting to keep their publicly funded, and they will literally do anything, cover up, lie, cheat. I mean, we saw this in this stupid example of Hugh. I mean, for God's sake, how many people actually swap points and this, that, and the other? But literally, he just wouldn't let up. He should have just admitted it, and it would have just disappeared. But he didn't. He just kept on lying and lying and lying and lying and lying until the authorities had no choice but to come down heavy on him and his wife, and they got jail sentences.
Okay, well, we are creeping up towards that time. So before I get David back into chip in, I just wanted to ask you how you saw the future of the UK. Do you see the way things are at the moment just continuing, it getting worse, and things not changing, or do you maybe see like a drastic change, and we start to see a different world around us?
We don't do drastic change. We tried that in 1640. The English people didn't quite like it. The English Civil War was, in terms of casualties, almost as bad as the First World War. Basically, since then, it was actually a shock to the system that people would rise up in revolt. And there's been a couple of other revolts that have happened in the last 10, 15 years. And when I was at university, we had an eminent historian there who taught us that negotiation by riot was an honourable tradition within English society. Is literally, you can push the English as far as you want up to a point. They turn. And when they turn, they are really, really quite vicious. And we've had stops and starts over the last 200 years where it seems like, oh, God's sake, is this never going to end? Is this always going to be the same? Like the Great Reform Act of 1832. That came after 20 odd years of repression under the Six Acts. But the reform, it did come. And reform has progressively happened. Going to the drugs thing, I mean, that's been banned. We know that we waste billions on fighting the war on drugs, which has failed. Everybody knows it. MI5 knows it. MI6, police know it. We all know it. And literally, bit by bit, countries and states across the world are now legalizing soft drugs and actually treating drug addiction treated as a medical problem, not a criminal one. That will actually take a lot of the, well, in terms of rational thought inside of our society, it's going to take that trade out of the armed criminals in our society. It's going to make all of our lives a lot easier and cheaper.
Okay, well, David, anything you'd like to add here before we wrap it up?
Well, he's got me, as always, Andrew, stirring up loads of thoughts in me. I mean, I knew we didn't have a full constitution, and I knew as a party we're pressing for one, but I feel deeply depressed. I actually thought we had more to build on than we actually do. So that's really, really depressing me.
Have 3 words, David. It's all the way.
Oh, no, stop.
Can't get any worse.
It's just too, yeah, it can't get any worse. Oh, my God. Andrew, let me round off with this. The voices of liberty, do you think they're actually represented in the mainstream media? And if not, why not?
No, they're not at all. I was very fortunate and pleased and honoured to be invited onto mainstream media. I was on a BBC programme in the morning, which I was asked to do a 10-minute slot. And the presenter phoned through to BBC Bristol and said, would you like to stay on for the full hour? And I said, why? And he said, because we've got people stacking up with questions who have never heard anybody talking like you're talking. I said, yes, I'm pleased to. I have to say that was the last time I was ever invited onto the BBC. So
I don't think we'll go down that route.
I think I was upsetting people. But I'm pleased to say that within the last few months, we've had a couple of by respected BBC journalists. We've had one disreputable BBC journalist invite us onto his programme, which after our last experience with him, with a former leader, we declined because we weren't going to take part in his Jeremy Kyle show of politics. Yeah. And we've done some very in international business media, and we are again being asked for our opinions because socialism seems to be gone through a bit of a torrid time since the days of Gordon Brown, that nobody actually trusts them anymore, and literally they just ebbing away. Now, we do need an effective opposition to conservatism, and that effective opposition, unfortunately, from a large block of Scottish nationalists, who I'm very, very hopeful are actually going to force through constitutional change on us. So I see great hope for the future. The fact that the Scottish problem, now I'm not even going to say problem because it's not a problem, the Scottish right of self-determination has been forced to the forefront. Now I take great comfort from 1935 when the SNP was founded. It was 2 men and a dog and a kilt. Now they're the government of Scotland. So I'm not going to see all the changes that I want to see coming forward, because you and I, David, will probably be kicking around about 110 when that happens. But we've got some great articulate Libertarian Party. I'm standing down in October. I've done an 8-year stint. When I started off, I had a full head of hair. I was gorgeous and good looking. I'm now it is time now to hand on to the next generation who are articulate, well educated, and know what they're talking about.
Oh, well said, Andrew. Paul, I think that's me done for this evening.
Yeah, no, it's been great having you on, Andrew. Is there anything you'd like to let our listeners know about before we wrap up?
It's been a pleasure. All I can say, if they want further information, you can always go through our Facebook page. or you can actually go to our website, which is www.libertarianpartyuk.com. We're always happy to answer any questions, and we try to get back as quickly as we can. We try to have a turnaround of 48 hours in actually getting a response to you, and we welcome more members, because that is really what we want. We have attended us to lecture at all the major universities in the country, and so we have great hope for the future. Great hope for the future.
Great. Okay. Well, as I say, it's been fantastic speaking to you, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, David.
That was Andrew Withers. Sorry for a little bit of a dodgy connection there. We had a few dropouts there. We did try to fix it, but sometimes it doesn't work. So you just have to let technology kick your ass sometimes. But we thought we managed to get through it, and we really enjoyed it, and we hope you did. And what did you think, David?
Technology and biology. I seem to have been choking to death all the way through that interview. I've absolutely no idea why the gremlins are against us. Well, I mean, look, as I said earlier, it's always interesting talking to a historian, someone that can nail down documents. Any friend of John Locke, the great British philosopher, is a friend of mine anyway. Look, these are timely issues, Paul. We've got to decide as a nation, as an electorate, where we're going, what we want. Do we want to increase our freedoms and our liberties or not? And I think that's really the overarching question in our society at the moment. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think people need to educate themselves about politics. I think people are just sort of, they're not really taught about the real ins and outs of politics, and they're sort of trained to, so that you think it's a load of rubbish, which most of the time in the government it probably is, to be honest. But I mean the philosophy behind it, and what makes you free and what makes you not free, and what as a society your ultimate goal should be, because it's all very well just looking at issues around you and how to fix them, but sometimes I think maybe you just got to look at the philosophy and everything, and as a people, where do we want to go? What is the point of life? What do you want out of life, you know?
Well, I mean, the greatest sleight of hand at the moment, because I've heard it repeated everywhere where I live, is that, oh, what's that got to do with me? You know, politics, what's that got to do with me and my life? Well, they can send the police and the army to tell you exactly what it's got to do with you if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
You know, you are involved in politics whether you like it or not, and maybe even I don't like it, but we are. That's just a fact of it all. I mean, there was something... Penn Jillette, you know, I've got a thing about Penn and Teller. We're the new Penn and Teller, Paul. We're the new Penn and Teller. I'm serious, by the way. It was something Penn said when he was on one of the American chat shows, you know, about how people caricature concepts of liberty, concepts of freedom. And I don't know why those things had a negative press until recently, though apparently they did, because Ron Paul was talking about that. Anyway, back to Penn Jillette. He was saying, you know, let's be real. If someone's attempting to assault somebody else, debates around how to increase their freedom are just false debates. You know, that may not be the best thing to do under those circumstances. So, you know, let's actually call spades spades. Let's actually say, you know, that is a real issue, that's not a real issue. David Cameron shouldn't have got away with describing a libertine as a libertarian, and we've all got to grow up a bit. You know, do we want to live in a 1984 Orwellian super state where we're told how to be happy, we're told how to be sad, we're told how to enjoy ourselves, we're told when and where and when not to have sex? I mean, if that's what we want, then okay, to my fellow citizens, please live that way, but don't include me in. And by the way, something very human will have been lost along the way.
Yep, very well said. And one thing I would like to add as well regarding the big state, small state kind of argument is I often wonder, well, okay, so you've got the big state takes care of everyone, everyone's seen to be okay. And then you've got the small state where, oh, this is a bit risky, you're going to get people that are going to get the short end of the stick. Well, a couple things. Firstly, I mean, if you're in that small state where there's more freedom for people to go out there in the world and just live how they like, there's still going to be good people in that environment. There's still going to be people that can have opportunities to create what they want to create in that environment. Where are all the good people going to go? Are they going to all suddenly vanish and all of a sudden it's just going to be a demonic evil state? because they haven't had a big ruling government force the environment to be like that. You know, I think it's natural. Human nature's natural to have tribes. They're tribal beings, lots of different communities. I don't see why we need this one big global dictatorship to make us do it, rather than just lots of little communities where we work it out for ourselves. And lastly, I'll add, when you've got the big global finances and the bankers that seem to be working things the way they are, it just seems to be a vicious circle, and it only seems like they're going to be getting more and more in control until they pretty much own everything anyway and run everything, because we'll need them for money. So yeah.
Oh, look, I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche, one of my favourite books is Thus Spake Zarathustra. I think it's in chapter 25, which opens with the phrase, the state is a lie. You know, there were good people before the present state. There'll be good people after the present state. They're a good people. We didn't live in this total perpetual violent anarchy before the present system came along. And by the way, judging by the nightly news, it's not doing too much to actually cure those things anyway, to my view, to my mind. It's actually making them worse.
Yeah. Now turn the news off and just look outside and you'll realise there's a lot more nice people than you think. That's what I think.
Turn the news off, talk to your neighbours, talk to your family, make more friends, and let's try and remember our common humanity.
I agree. I totally agree. And I think that wraps it up for this week. Thank you for tuning in, listeners, and I hope you enjoyed that. Please send us any thoughts or ideas, any recommendations, maybe someone from another party who you'd like to hear us interview. But yeah, that'll be great. Please tell your friends about the show, link it, and if you're feeling really generous, pop to our website and send us a small donation so we can help keep producing the show further and developing it. We shall be back soon, and we've got plenty guests. We've got plenty guests coming in the future for interesting debate. Till next time, we shall be seeing you.
Chelsea.